So thanks for joining us for this session. Thank you to CNet Training for setting this panel up, and thank you for DCME for broadcasting this. My name is Mark Acton. I'm an independent consultant, and I'll be moderating the session for the next 45 minutes. What I'm going to do is have each of the panelists introduce themselves and just explain a little bit about their, what their current role, the company they work for, and their interest in the area of training. So to kick things off, I'm going to ask Andrew Stevens, MD of CNet, to get us going. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Mark. My name is Andrew Stevens, and I'm the CEO of CNet Training. We've been in business for 24 years now, and obviously the subject of human risk in the data center and how we can mitigate that via training and education is pretty key to what we do. And our challenge is that largely we've not seen much success in changing the statistics we've had over the past 20 years. So we're keen to see that alter.
Thanks, Andrew. And Martin Murphy.
Hi, everyone. Martin Murphy, Chief Operating Officer for CBRE Data Center Solutions. We run the largest outsource of global operations within data centers, and at the heart of that is people. And I think, the passion around this subject is shared by me and many of my team that, we invest everything in our people in relation to making it successful. They're the assets of the CBRE business, and they're somewhat the engine of it as well. So we try and ensure they're as best equipped as they can be to do their duties for the customer, across the world every day.
Great, thanks, Martin. And Kathryn Aves.
Hi, I'm Kathryn Aves. I'm the Managing Director of Bluepoint Technologies. I've been within the data center infrastructure industry for 23 years. Putting that into context, I started my career the same year as Steve Jobs rejoined Apple with CD rewriter drives became a thing. I started at an entry-level support job and worked my way up with hands-on roles, numerous installers, delivering technology solutions to blue chip companies and government organisations. We're a busy, growing company. My MD role, I support the whole business to ensure we provide best-in-class services at every touch point. That ethos goes for the industry too. I'm proud to have been active in the UK team creating recognised learning pathways with competence accreditations for the network infrastructure through the ECS scheme.
Thanks, Kathryn. Thanks very much. And finally, Vijay Mistry.
Hi, I'm Vijay Mistry. I'm a partner at VIPA Digital. We're a small data center advisory and consulting practice. We set up in early 2018, and we've been sort of trading for almost 3 years now. My background, I've spent 25 years running infrastructure environments and data center environments. Most of my career has been running operational teams. So the people aspect of this conversation is very key to me as well. So I'm keen to sort of share war stories and learn from other people's perspectives as well.
Brilliant. Thanks, Vijay. So thank you all. Thanks for the introductions. Thanks for getting us started. I'm going to kick off with the questions. And the first question really is a question to all of you. We talk about human risk, and we talk about the humans in the data center posing a threat potentially, and obviously people are nonetheless our best asset. So what risks do people in the data center, do humans in the data center actually expose us to? Let's start off with Andrew, if you would, please.
I think the risk that is posed to us from human error, the data center, is all around, and it comes in many different forms. Not just the technician working in the data center, but the design from the beginning part of the whole process through to operational procedures, through to the project management. So there's lots of areas within the DC environment where risk occurs. And so obviously we talk about downtime as being the thing we want to prevent the most. So that's sort of the key area, but we aren't at the robotic data center yet. So the humans, how they perform, what their attitudes are, whether they like the organization they work for, all of these sorts of things have a massive impact on risk, and that's what we're exposed to.
Great, thank you. And Martin, your teams obviously are operating within data centers. You're putting the team in on those sites. How do you see it from your perspective? I mean, obviously they are vital to the operation, but nonetheless, I think we all do consider an element of risk involved in having people in any data center.
Yeah, and it's strange that, you know, if you go back 5 or 6 years, there was almost, you know, a thought process of the more people you have in the team or the more people you have in the data center, the more resilient that you would be within operations. But I think we've seen that sort of mindset change somewhat. But I think it varies, Mark, between the type of data center, the type of individual, yeah, and the strategy, you know, that data center has in relation to maintenance, whether it's frequency, operations, and then there's the whole layer of tools and process, you know, relation to change management and all of that stuff that goes on, that supports the individual when they actually intervene. I think Andy touched on it as well. You know, when we talk about human error in a data center, you know, we do RCAs. The human error aspect could have happened in a factory, you know, putting a component in a, you know, a UPS or a generator that was substandard, and, you know, it's still defined as human error. So
yeah,
I think as we go forward, we see technology play a part and data centers be designed a little bit different. We're going to see that human interaction hopefully move to responding to things that are going to fail, rather than, you know, traditionally engineers have been responding to things that have already failed.
Yeah, no, brilliant. That makes sense. And Kathryn, what's your perspective on this one? What's your experience?
Yes, I agree with Andrew and Martin, but also there's the dependency I find on each other. So you have your engineers on site, but they're very dependent potentially on the other engineer that's on that site. And so if you've got different levels of ability as well, you're then sometimes struggling with who's depending on who, and then that you've got that other element of the human error that's coming into the equation there. So that's another thing that we pick up on, having different skill sets within the same environment.
So sort of a handoff between individuals almost.
It can be, yeah.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. And Vijay, I know you've had an opportunity to look at a number of different types of sites in different locations across different industries. You've got probably a very rounded perspective on this. What's your impression?
Yeah, I mean, look, even with the best teams in the world, one of the biggest exposures we have is exposure to human error.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes we're dealing with repetitive tasks, and over time, you know, complacency may creep in as well. So, you know, how we combat complacency, how we, you know, prepare our staff is absolutely key. There's one thing we can't eliminate is human error, just by sheer nature of us being humans, and when we make mistakes. So I think that's one of the biggest risks, and this conversation today in how we combat that and how we mitigate risks and reduce that is absolutely key, especially when you're working in mission critical environments.
Yeah. So you mentioned a good point there. So we've highlighted the risk of, you know, humans can potentially, obviously not just potentially, but will make mistakes. How do we mitigate against those mistakes? How do we prevent those from happening, Vijay? You know, since you brought it up, I'm going to come straight back to you.
That's fine. I think, you know, education, assessment, you know, planning, you know, readiness. You know, one thing we've done, you know, in various teams I've run is we've tested through war drills as well, you know, fire drills, you know, ensuring that, you know, people may know, you know, their technical subject area, but the way they behave under pressurized environments when something's gone wrong it can be very different as well. You know, we've seen people who know their stuff technically, but you know, when something's broken, there's a business impact. That's, you know, there's a lot of shouting going on. You know, sometimes their ability to even follow process is questioned as well. So, you know, when things are good, it's great. But you know, we constantly used to have war drills. We'd constantly, you know, test our processes, our controls, and the way, you know, our engineers behave as well under pressurized environments as well.
Okay.
So, you know, dealing with stress is actually key as well.
Yeah, makes sense. And Kathryn, what's your experience of risk mitigation, and what would you advise?
It is understanding that person's real skills, just as Vijay's just said. It's the knowledge and ability that they have in the real skill when that issue is happening. It's all well and good that they've got it on paper and they can sit through an exam, but when they're under pressure, it's knowing how they're going to react and how they're going to deal with the situation when the situation is actually in front of them and it's not a situation they're just reading on a piece of paper. So yeah, it's identifying, managing and understanding them to get their real skills out of them.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, it's training on site. It is on-site training.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Yeah, thank you. And Martin, what do you, from a CBRE perspective, put into place to try and mitigate some of these risks?
So lots of things that Kathryn and Vijay have said, but we started right at the beginning. Our business is 4.5 years old now since we launched the data center solutions business. And if we were going to have the right individual in a data center, we should start with a hiring process. So we created a behavioral assessment tool, which told us some of the things that Kathryn's just touched on about the individual, about how they react under stress, about their ability to follow process, all of that stuff. And then when you identify the right individual, and that allowed us to take individuals from oil and gas industry and the aviation industry and any other industry, and if they had the right DNA to work in a data center, we then overlay the training, development, education. And I'd really do think of education and training as two completely different things. You can teach somebody how to program, a fire alarm panel in a data center, which is linked to EPOs and a whole number of other systems, and he might not do it for over a year, depending on what he's done. And then, in a time of crisis at 2:00 in the morning, he suddenly got to react and actually remember, how to do a process. So I think there's a whole number of things. Human factors program was another one that we built in to try and empower an engineer that, when he's on shift and in his environment, he owns it and he shouldn't be swayed by other people, to react. And just like understanding his well-being. And back to the, Johnny's worked on site for 10 years. He's done the switching every time we've needed it for, UPS is going offline, and he's been chosen to do it, for the planned works in a week's time. But nobody's actually aware of the fact that, Johnny's gone through a divorce, or he's got, a death in the family, or something else. And it's empowering engineers that when they don't feel they're the right people to take on a task or take on that stress of the environment, that they're empowered to kind of do so.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, making them genuinely empowered. Andrew, Martin brought up a couple of interesting points there, talking about education and training. Clearly, that's an area that you have a huge interest in. So how does education and training help in this area, and what form should it take?
Well, I think, the education and the training and all the things that both Martin and Kathryn have mentioned all have to go hand in hand. One thing doesn't solve any of the problems, and so we often find with some of our clients that they think that the training course itself is enough on its own, and they don't have the systems, the human factors that Martin mentioned. The culture of the organisation isn't suitable. Let's say it's a high blame culture, so people are scared of making mistakes or bringing up topics and those kind of things. So we can impart the knowledge and the education, and we can assess people to understand where they are. But as the others have said, they've got to be able to use that, practice it, understand why they're doing the things that they're doing. They've got to follow the procedures, and if the procedures need changing, they've got to follow that in the correct way, so they don't just change one procedure so it impacts on another. So, the education is part of it, but as Martin and Kathryn said, it's the whole package that actually will start to identify and mitigate risk, not one singular part.
Okay, thank you. And sticking with you, Andrew, one of the confusions I sometimes have when we're talking about training and education particularly is the difference between certification and qualification. I know you have a view on this, and I know you feel they are very different things and should be used potentially differently. So could you expand on that a little bit, please?
Well, you're certainly not alone, Mark.
Good. You've tried to explain it before. I need a refresher.
Certification and qualification, so I suspect I'll go to my grave still explaining it, but there you go. I'll keep it succinct, is that qualifications can only be awarded by awarding bodies, and awarding bodies are regulated by whichever government that sits in. So here in the UK, we have awarding bodies such as City and Guilds and BTEC Pearson, for example. There are a few others of them, and they are, commissioned by the government. And what happens is there is a very, very strict process how you create a qualification, how you assess that qualification. You have to be able to identify the knowledge, skills, behaviours, and then assess in a correct way. You are then audited on that, so that if in all of the training that we offer and the education we provide, it's the same standard worldwide. So we have to come in just like you do with the financial auditing and check that we're doing everything correctly. Hence, we can't pass everybody, and you wouldn't expect everybody to pass because that's not the way education would operate. People are at different levels. So that is a qualification. The good thing about a qualification is that it's third party. You have it for life. That's it. No one's ever going to take it away from you. But the problem with a qualification, sort of to Martin's point, to a certain extent, we're talking about the EPOs and the fire panel. If you don't practice it, if you don't use it, over time, your knowledge will disappear. You'll lose some of the understanding. So that's where a certification can come in. A certification tends to be something that is renewed every 2 or 3 years based on continuing education, another assessment, so where you have to demonstrate currency. Yeah. So here at CNet, what we do is we combine the two. So you have to pass the qualification, which is, again, third-party audited. And of course, the thing about qualifications is they have different levels. In the UK, we have 8 levels of qualification. Ours range from level 3 to level 7, which is effectively A level through to master's degree in a snapshot. So you would gain your qualification, and what we then do is we then award you a certification based on that qualification. And we then ask you to renew that certification every 3 years by attending a program, undertaking some assessment, so that we can prove that you are still current and valid. And that's how we combine the two things together, but they are very different because anybody can award a certification in anything. And many certifications out there in all sorts of industries have absolutely zero validity behind them. They are just, you turned up, we're going to give you a certificate. So that's why we base ours upon you having to pass the third-party qualification first.
Yeah, that makes sense. I may actually understand it going forward now. Thank you. Martin, within CBRE, how do you apply that sort of rationale? Is that something you address and utilise?
Yeah, that's back to the training education thing. I think we were probably guilty in the past of just deploying education regardless of need. So we were teaching people things they already knew, and we were I think with the CNet program that we started 16, 17 months ago, where we committed to have the entire workforce certified. It was a big ask, but the first stage of that was actually being able to assess the entire organization and find out where everybody was, what they needed, and then build that foundation of education, which also told us where we had to apply the training, whether that was internal training from technical directors or technical managers, or whether we went to guys like Vertiv or Schneider to bring in some specific kind of infrastructure type training and stuff. So I think it's constant, and the way I describe it in terms of you have to keep doing it is it's like going to the gym, right? If you apply the kind of methodology of constantly creating a culture of training and development, if you do it for 2 days, there's no result. Look in the mirror, you don't get anywhere. If you do it for 3 months constantly, you go, wow, you're getting a result. But if you stop doing it for 3 months, it disappears very quickly. And the rate of growth that this industry has, and the new people coming into it from other industries, it requires that constant attention and investment.
Yeah, I like the analogy. That works for me, based on experience, certainly. So, Kathryn, how do you apply, or do you apply this sort of logic within your organisation and your customers?
Yeah. So there's a keenness to train out there. I don't dispute that at all.
Certainly.
It's getting the individuals to actually understand the method they've maybe practiced for the last 2 or 3 years isn't the method they now need to practice with the evolving technologies, and that's where I find it of there's everything's changing, technology's changing, and therefore they need that recertification, as Andrew went through. And it's trying to get that to keep evolving through the business and continue that ethos with them, that training has to keep being recertified. We're very much invested in the training with all our guys. Everyone's trained from the outset with some sort of CNet qualification, then moving through the industry. But it's moving them through it, providing with that information on why that next bit of training is relevant, why it's changed, and that's the bit that maybe we find harder to train the individuals that are out on site, rather than going, well, I've always done it like that. It's like, yeah, you may have done, but over the years technology's changed, training's changed, it's updated, and we need to keep evolving that through the business. And that's probably my hardest hurdle with my on-site guys, is making them understand the constant evolving of technology.
Yeah, and I guess that's the difference between training and education to some degree, isn't it? You're potentially changing a mentality rather than just giving people technical skills.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and it is getting them to understand that and understand why we're doing this and moving forwards. Yeah,
no, brilliant. Thank you. Vijay, on to you. I'm going to change tack slightly. Kathryn mentioned that she's very keen within her organisation to get people trained and get them up to speed. But that's not necessarily true across the industry, is it? I mean, people see training as a cost rather than a benefit. What's your experience of that?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, especially when you have cost pressures in an environment. It's funny, when you've been asked to review your budgets, one of the first things that seems to go is the training budget. Yeah. Especially when you're under financial pressure, when you're managing your budgets as well, which is a real shame, because typically your people are your biggest assets in an organization, especially a data center environment. So I personally believe it should be the last thing to go. But that continuous investment in people will pay dividends as well. And also, what people have talked about training, I think all individuals are different as well. So, an assessment that's based around an individual that provides tailored training is also key as well. Martin runs a huge organization, and just to roll out standard training, that's not going to cut it. Absolutely. Everyone's at different levels, different competencies as well. So having the ability to assess individuals and apply some bespoke training to individuals, that will pay dividends as well.
Yeah.
And your staff will see the investment in them as well. So it's a win-win.
It's a very valid point. I mean, it's not just about gaining of skills, is it? It's about knowing when to apply those skills. Not everybody will necessarily need the skills training. What they might need is some sort of more cultural change to address the way they react to certain situations. Yeah, makes perfect sense. I know, Andrew, you've got a famous phrase on this one, haven't you? Which I won't steal your thunder on. But what's your phrase on this one? I quite like it.
It depends. There's a few. I mean, in reality, I agree with Vijay there. Is that there's nothing worse than putting someone through an education program that doesn't require it. Demotivates them. It's a waste of money.
Yeah.
And so understanding what individuals need and placing the right level of education and training with them is much better. I've had a number of instances before where we've assessed individuals and we've come out and there's a group of them that are, let's say substandard. And I've said to the CEO of that business, you really need to be looking at that. Why are you training those people? And they've just turned around and said, well, I'm not training them because they're not very good.
Yeah.
Thinking, well, why are they in the business then? And obviously training is often used, unfortunately, just as a reward. Either someone's going to leave or instead of pay or something in those lines, they'll just throw a training course at somebody and say, well, there you go, that's what you need. And that's not how it should be used. That's not the way this should be done. So it should be used as part of the business. And I know as well that, a lot of companies tend to have a percentage model of what they're going to spend on research and development, what they're going to spend on marketing, what they're going to spend. Never happens for training. The training budget is nearly always, with the odd exception of a few, companies, is always, I'll go and see if I can get some budget. I don't know what the budget is. Yeah. It's not often there at the beginning of a year across our industry, but it's similar in many other sectors as well.
Yeah, no, the phrase I was particularly thinking of was the one that you gave to me, which is all about the idea that someone will come back and say, what happens if I train an individual and they leave? And your response to that is, well, what happens if you don't train them and they stay? Which I rather liked.
I think also what also occurs is that you've got to explain to people why you're putting them through this process as well.
Sure.
In Kathryn's business, we work closely together. That all of her people know they're on a pathway.
Yeah.
It's not just one-off thing, and there's nothing worse. And Martin does the same. There's nothing worse than giving someone something 1 year. They come and say, right, I want to increase my knowledge. I want to get better. And you say, oh no, you're doing a good job there. That's it. It has to be, as Vijay pointed out, continual, ongoing, and you'll get it as part of the culture then.
Yeah, that's a good point. And since Andrew mentioned you, Kathryn, how do you assess people in that respect? How do you make sure that you are giving the right people the right training, the right education? Is there an assessment process you go through, or is it structured?
I wouldn't say no. So I wouldn't say it's structured. It's very informal. We will literally talk to the guys. Some of them will have, an ability in one area that someone else wouldn't. And we show them the CNet pathway that's available to them, and we'll say, where do you want to go on this pathway? Because I don't want them all trained in one direction, because that isn't going to help me as a business either. So we open up the CNet pathway to them and offer them, have a look at this, see what you want to do. Obviously, when they do their courses with CNet, they're able to discuss what other openings, what further education there is, and they'll come to me, we'll sit down and discuss it. And if I can see a pathway that helps them, helps me, and we'll give them that confidence to then work on customer sites, then that's the way we follow it. We don't have I don't take someone on and think, right, I'm going to make sure they go down the network way. This one's going to be my fiber. Everyone has an ability to work in a certain field, I sometimes think, better than another field. We can all bubble along across the top, but if you've got an extra ability or want to learn something in particular, then why not let them follow that path? Because it's only going to help me, help the customer, and help them enjoy their working life ultimately.
Absolutely, makes perfect sense. Yeah, thank you. Martin, one for you. I think one of the things that we talk about frequently in the data center world is this, the shortage of talent, or the lack of talent coming into the sector. The difficulty in finding the right people to work in our data centers. Education clearly potentially plays a big part in that. I mean, how do you address, firstly, the shortage of potential talent, and then, given that we don't have that, ready-made talent, do you go through a process of bringing people up to speed, educating them, getting them up to the point where you want them to be?
All of the above.
Fair enough, yeah.
We started, once this business, January 2016, we've grown at some between 15 and 20% every year, from 10 countries to now almost 50. So you have, I mean, the people are the engineer business. The only way to be successful is to develop them. I mean, we've had, I don't know, probably every function in the business now go through some of the CNet training, whether they're in procurement or commercial or HR. People just want to know about it and they want to develop. And it's, the same as Kathryn said, there's an element of the business where it's more loose and people are allowed to think about, moving into other functions and getting training for it. And then there's a part of it where it's a little bit more structured within a kind of engineering environment. But there's not a single person in our business who doesn't have access to, development, a career. And, engineers deciding they want to be project managers, or, contract support people deciding they want to go into procurement and stuff. It's, you just, with the challenge for talent, the sort of job-rich talent shortage, one of the ways to attract and retain talent is be able to demonstrate an investment in them and being able to develop them and develop their careers.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Vijay, moving on to you, similar sort of question, really. It's, given that we don't have these people ready made to come into our sector, clearly education plays a huge part of that. How would you approach
I think
bringing new people into the industry? Sorry.
I think we just need to be more open, from other sectors as well.
Yeah.
We need to be more open and attract talent from other sectors, right? And use training. There's so many synergies we have with other industries, whether it's oil and gas or other mission critical environments. Yeah. Right. I mean, even at VIPA Digital, we've got a number of roles that we're recruiting for, and we're being open-minded where we're looking at other sectors to see, well, we can teach them about data centers, but do they have the core skills in what we're asking them to do?
Yeah.
So I just add to that, Vijay, I'd done a D&I interview for the wider CBRE business this morning, and the guy that was interviewing me said, I've been trying to get into data centers for 20 years. He said, ever since I qualified as an electrical engineer, he said, and every time they said, can you tell us about your experience, it was just shut the door on your way out type thing. So as an industry, I think we've been terrible, to Vijay's point, at, opening the doors and attracting talent and diversity.
I think that's
I think attitudes need to change. Absolutely. Otherwise, we're shooting ourselves in the foot.
Well, I think you're exactly right, both of you. I mean, we say we want to bring people into the industry, and then we set the barrier way too high. You're saying you want 5 years of experience, plus a degree, plus whatever else. And it's like, come on, guys, you don't necessarily need the experience. Again, with training and education, we can get people up to speed, surely. It's the right attitude, surely. So good. So I'm going to ask another question, which I think every panel on the planet is going to ask. Are the lessons in terms of education and training and the way we do things to be taken from the whole COVID-19 virus situation? We've had all sorts of problems with site access. We've had all sorts of problems with getting people to do the jobs that we'd normally be doing. Are there lessons to be taken from that? I'm going to throw this one at you, Kathryn, if I may.
I don't know whether there's training lessons to be learned on this. As you say, the reducing site footfall has been a major one. So then it is ensuring that singular person is comfortable and trained in that one element that maybe they're going on site to do. But then there's the whole host of health and safety that relates to that element of the work they're doing.
Yeah.
So it's very important that they are trained to do that job on their own, because that's the big hurdle we've had, putting that one man in, whereas normally we would always send two for health and safety reasons, especially if they're going into a DC area where there's no one else. That's what COVID's affected us with, I have to say, more the one man than anything else, and ensuring the safety of that one man, ensuring the works are done, because it's how do you check those works? It's his word. Everyone else's. And again, it's making sure that the right qualified person, they've got the right skill set to be in that area doing that job.
So it's lone working is a challenge. I'm sure you're right. Yeah, exactly. And Martin, obviously, as a business, you've had to sort of face these challenges. Is training education part of this? I mean, obviously, there's a much bigger picture, but
I mean, it's almost become more accessible than it was before, because the analogy and thought process was put somebody on a plane or a train and take them to an event where you sit down, and now the technology that's being used to deliver training is amazing, right? It's virtual. Everybody's getting comfortable with it. We can get content out a lot quicker. So I think it's definitely the transformation in terms of how we can deliver it, how quickly we can deliver it, and the number of people we can reach at the speed has been great. But equally, I think there's other aspects of the data center in relation to risk and failure that are changing as well, just due to the different strategies that some companies have used during. And just one example, I spoke to a customer with a large portfolio that said in Q2 their incidents were more than 50% down from Q2 2019. and the only thing they had done differently was, effectively stop doing maintenance, or at least stop maintenance that they didn't see as critical. So that goes back to the, if you stop the footfall and the human intervention aspect. And I'm not saying by any means that we should stop doing maintenance at data centers, but there's maybe another lens to look at how we do it, how frequently we do it, and how trained and developed the people are that do it.
Yeah. I mean, it's a truism, isn't it, that any change carries some element of risk. It's about managing that risk.
Yeah.
Change introduces risk without question. And so on the same theme, Andrew, obviously COVID's been a little bit of a challenge for you guys, getting people into the training room, into the classroom. But I've noticed, you're doing an awful lot more online now, and how's that going? Is that proving successful? Martin's alluded to the fact that you're able to cover far more people with the training now. How's that working from a delivery side?
Well, I mean, not many people say this, but sort of COVID was a bit of a godsend when it came down. We pretty much had 40% of our customers already attending classes by remote attendance, but we had a stubborn 60% of those clients who wouldn't move to that. And you always have an interesting analogy when somebody says, well, a training course is expensive at X thousand pounds, and then, as Martin alluded to, they're also flying to the venue, staying at the venue for this period of time, and they're out of the office for 7 days and things. So that actually typically doubles the cost of the training.
Yeah.
So, we've been forced change has meant that our clients had to move to this or not attend. Fortunately, most of them continued on and have attended, and they've been forced to experience the remote attendance, and actually they love it. They're at home, they're in a quiet office, they're not having to spend all the company's money. And one of the things that we've been trying to do is sort of, when we're tendering for work and asking people, we are sort of giving them almost now two prices. One price to remotely, and another one if we've got to actually get a room. We're doing a piece of work around sustainability of that as well. Because actually, when you realise you're flying 12 people to a venue, we're flying to a venue to train them, and all of that issue, and we've got all that offset as well. So in actual fact, it was very positive for us. There are some classes that we still have to do in person in the infrastructure space, but I mean that's been limited. But largely most of our customers have been happy with it, and we've seen a sort of recovery to nearly normal levels, which is great.
Wow. Yeah, that is sort of counterintuitive, but great. Yeah, fantastic. We're nearly out of time. We've got about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to ask one final question. Something that I think Martin and possibly Kathryn alluded to earlier. We talk about automation in data centers. We talk about AI. I don't actually believe AI exists yet. People market it, but AI is some way off in my view, true AI. But we certainly have machine learning, and we certainly have tools that are taking advantage of that, that and analytics. Are we really, and this is a question to Vijay, I think initially, are we really going to see a reduction in humans in data centers as a result of these techniques? Again, machine learning in particular, the tools that develop from that. Vijay, do you think we're going to see either a reduction in people in data centers or even potentially an elimination of people in data centers?
Certainly not in the foreseeable future. I think we're still 5-10 years away from that as well. And I think, I have a different sort of perspective on this as well. And I think so long as applications have a dependency on resiliency, on physical resiliency. So if a server goes down within a data center, typically those services will fail over to another server within that data center. Now, if an application has the architecture to have resiliency to fail over from data centers to a different region, then you're less reliant on that physical data center.
Yeah.
And I think, then maybe the need for 24/7 personnel in a data center may be reduced because you'll need to go and fix it immediately goes away as well.
Yeah.
So I think it's really down to, how applications evolve and the resiliency and the application layer will evolve as well, will determine the staffing levels in a data center personally. So
not really the tools, it's more about the applications that are resident in the data center. So if you've got application level,
I think we'll get better at managing the data center environment, with AI and, machine learning in terms of better trend analysis, more predictive, proactive maintenance, trying to head off any failures. But we're still dealing with physical equipment that requires some personnel.
Yeah.
Now whether that needs to be 24/7 may change.
Yeah. Okay. No, that very much in line with my thinking as well. And Kathryn, obviously you're very much involved with the management of infrastructure. Is that your view as well?
Yeah, very much so. It's more the equipment rather than the downtime. It's the equipment changes over. That needs personnel at the moment, and I can't see that changing. But lesser personnel. That is something I've noticed already. So data centers used to have maybe 4 people on all the time, whereas they are dropping that down to 2. With the on-call services, the ways that people can now work from home, which is something COVID's brought in a couple of data centers we work in.
Right.
Now they have a guy at home and only one guy on site. That's the way we work it. And if the job that comes in needs 2, then the other one's called in. So the second one has to be a certain distance away. So that we are lessening maybe the footfall on site, but there's definitely not a machine learning experience going on. It is still a hands-on job that's required, but there's a different way of managing it rather than having the footfall sitting there 24/7 waiting for that ticket to come through, for that downtime to be reacted against. That's the difference I'm seeing at the moment. Still got them, but in a different remit, working from home.
And possibly working in a more efficient way in some respects.
Yeah.
Martin, and obviously your teams are on site, etc. Do you see the tools coming down the pipe? Enabling them better. Is it going to change the way people work? Is it?
We're just about to launch something called Advanced Data Center Management, which uses sort of technology to enable operations to be a lot more efficient, a lot more predictive. I do see it happening maybe a little bit quicker than Vijay said. 5 to 10 years. I think we're going to see maybe some 24/7 moving back to something less than it. But I think in terms of taking people out of data centers, until we start designing them for people not to be in them, then we're going to struggle to entirely take the people out of them.
That's a fair point. Yeah, if they're not designed to be done that way, they're not going to be done that way, are they? Entirely fair. Right, we need to wrap up. We're pretty much at the end of the time. I'm just going to ask for a brief comment from each of you to wrap up, just to sort of emphasise your views on training and education. And Andrew, if you just sort of kick us off, brief finishing comments, please.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you to the panellists. No, I think my view is that training should be part of your overall business strategy. That's the key part for me. It needs to be at board level. It needs to have support from the top, and then it needs to be integrated into everything you're trying to do, and challenge the ROI on it. Make sure that it is giving back to the business exactly what is needed. And I think that's the key part. And just to your point there on footfall in the data center, the better skilled engineers that you've got, the less of them you need.
Exactly. Thank you. Martin?
Yeah, thank you, panelists. Great discussion. And sort of summing up, I think if your business is about people and those people have an impact, good or bad, then it's a no-brainer to use the investment in training, education, development, and just providing career paths.
Great, thank you, Martin. Kathryn?
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Again, the training of my staff, everyone within the business is utmost importance for me, if nothing else, so I can sleep easy at night, knowing that I have got that training in place. And that continual progression for them, to give them the want, the need to progress as well. It's not just about giving that basis training, it's moving them forward throughout the industry and showing them what else is out there. It might mean I lose them, but good on them, they move on to something else and I can bring someone else through as well. That's something that we need to remember. There's new young blood coming through and we need to support those as well. And
if they do leave and you've treated them well, they may be your best salespeople.
Precisely. I've got a few floating around it. I still believe in mine.
Perfect. Vijay, finally from you.
It's quite simple. I think for most organisations, people are their biggest assets. Yeah. So, look after them and continue to invest in them, and the rewards will come.
Perfect. Great note to end on. Thank you. So thanks everybody. Thanks panelists. Thanks everybody for listening. We are at the end of the actual the question session, but we do have a Q&A session now. So please throw us your questions and we'll do our best to respond to them. But we're going to sign off from this particular question session. Thank you again for listening in. Thank you, panelists.
Thank you.